Millions of years ago, before the rise of cities, kings, or even language, the earth was a place both beautiful and brutal. Forests stretched endlessly, thick with ferns, towering trees, and creeping vines that glistened with dew each morning. Rivers carved through the land, swarming with ancient fish and reptiles, while skies filled with the cries of massive birds. In this untamed world lived the earliest forms of humans, beings not yet like the modern man but closer to the monkeys that still swing in today's forests. Their bodies were covered with coarse hair, their arms long and powerful, their faces a mixture of flat noses, jutting brows, and wide mouths that revealed sharp teeth used both for tearing fruit and defending against predators. These creatures, often moving in small groups, survived by foraging, climbing, and hiding, always alert for threats lurking in the shadows. Unlike modern humans, they had no tools of stone, no fire to keep the night at bay, no words to share stories. Survival was instinct, and every heartbeat was a reminder of their fragile place in the chain of life. Yet they were clever, able to watch and learn, able to coordinate with gestures, cries, and shared glances. Their lives were a constant test, for predators roamed the earth. Saber-toothed cats with fangs as long as a human hand, giant birds that swooped down with talons capable of piercing flesh, and lurking reptiles that moved silently in swamps. But perhaps the strangest and most terrifying enemy was not a predator in the ordinary sense, but the giant ground sloth. This beast was massive, larger than a bear, towering twice the height of the proto-humans, covered in thick shaggy fur that hung in clumps, its claws curved like scythes, each longer than the arms of those who feared it. Unlike today's gentle tree sloths, the ground sloth was a force of destruction. It tore down trees with ease, defended itself violently, and when desperate, it turned into a nightmare for anything smaller in its path. The proto-humans knew its scent, its roar, its thunderous steps, and most of all, the devastation it left when it wandered into their feeding grounds. For them, the battle for survival against such a creature was not a choice but a demand of existence itself. The proto-humans had always been cautious around the giant ground sloths, for though the beasts fed primarily on plants, their immense size and terrible claws made them dangerous neighbors. On one fateful morning, a small band of these early humans, no more than 10 in number, ventured into a clearing where fruit trees hung heavy with ripened food. Their bellies growled with hunger, and their sharp eyes scanned the trees for the sweetest harvest. But as they leapt and climbed, shaking branches and gathering what they could, the earth trembled beneath their feet. From the shadows of the forest, a massive shape emerged, a giant ground sloth, drawn by the same fruits that the proto-humans craved. It moved slowly, but with each step the ground quivered, and when it stood fully upright, it seemed like a living mountain covered in brown fur and musk. The proto-humans froze, their instincts screaming. Some hissed, others shrieked low warning cries, and quickly they retreated to the trees. But the sloth was not deterred. With terrifying power, it reared back, its claws slicing through branches as if they were twigs. A single swing tore down half the tree, scattering fruits across the soil. The proto-humans clung high above, but one misjudged the movement and slipped, falling dangerously close to the beast's massive form. The ground sloth, startled, let out a deep guttural roar that echoed across the clearing. It swiped again, narrowly missing the fallen proto-human, who scrambled back toward the safety of his kin. The group chattered, shrieked, and stamped their feet in panic, but also in defiance. Though small, they had strength in numbers, and in that moment, something changed in their instincts. Instead of merely fleeing, they began to act together, throwing fruits, sticks, and rocks down upon the beast in a primitive form of group defense. The sloth, though barely hurt, grew irritated and swung wildly. Trees cracked and fell, dust rose, and the proto-humans fled branch to branch. That day, they learned that though they were weaker, they had something the beast did not: the power to think and act as one. This first clash would ignite the beginnings of a long struggle, where survival meant not only running but daring to stand against the impossible. Days turned into nights, and the memory of the giant sloth haunted the proto-humans. They returned to their shelters in the cliffs, huddled close together, their large eyes reflecting the flicker of starlight. They groomed one another nervously, picked insects from their hair, and made shrill calls to reassure their young. But hunger gnawed at them again, and the fruit grove, though dangerous, remained their best source of food. The sloth too returned, drawn each day to the bounty of fallen fruit. The proto-humans began to study it. From treetop perches, they watched its movements. They saw that it was slow to turn, that its rage was strongest when directly provoked, and that it became vulnerable when pulling down heavy branches, for it exposed its chest and neck. These observations stirred something new within their primitive minds: strategy. With no weapons but what nature provided, they experimented. They cracked nuts not just to eat, but to test which stones were hardest. They jabbed with sticks at small animals to learn how to strike. They worked together to corner prey, driving it into pits or against rocks. Slowly, without knowing it, they were inventing the roots of hunting. The ground sloth was still an unbeatable force to them, but they no longer saw themselves only as prey. Whispers of courage passed in their shrieks and howls, and they began rehearsing movements together. One would distract, others would leap and strike. Their long fingers curled around stones, their jaws clenched with determination. Survival was no longer a lonely struggle. It was becoming a shared battle, a lesson taught by the giant sloth's menace. The forest trembled each time the creature appeared, but now, instead of scattering, the proto-humans lingered longer, observing, testing, daring. What once was only fear began to grow into something far more powerful: resolve. The decisive confrontation came during a season when food grew scarce. The fruits that sustained the proto-humans became fewer, and desperation drove them into direct conflict with the beast. On that day, the sun rose red, burning through the mist that clung to the forest. The band of proto-humans crept into the grove, clutching sharp rocks, heavy branches, and their sharpened courage. Their calls were hushed, their movements quick. Suddenly, the giant sloth arrived, hungrier and more aggressive than ever, its fur matted with dust, its claws scraping deep grooves in the earth. The proto-humans knew they could not simply chase it away. They had to fight or starve. One of the boldest males shrieked, leaping from the trees to draw the beast's attention. The sloth roared, swinging its claws, and the battle began. Rocks pelted its body, sticks jabbed into its flanks, and shrill cries echoed through the grove as the proto-humans swarmed from all sides. The beast swiped, killing one instantly, his body broken and still. But the group pressed on, their grief turning to fury. They leapt, bit, scratched, and hurled stone after stone, targeting the chest and neck they had studied before. Blood matted its fur, its bellows shook the air, and yet it kept fighting, relentless. The struggle was chaos: dust, screams, roars, and snapping branches. One proto-human climbed high and dropped a heavy rock upon the beast's skull, stunning it briefly. Others rushed in, driving sharp sticks into its softer underbelly. The sloth staggered, clawing wildly, but its movements slowed. At last, with a final coordinated assault, the proto-humans brought the giant crashing to the ground, the earth trembling beneath its massive weight. Silence followed, broken only by the panting of the survivors. They had done what no small creature should have been able to do: defeat a living mountain. In the aftermath of the battle, the proto-humans gathered around the fallen sloth. They touched its fur, sniffed at its body, and shrieked with triumph. For the first time in their existence, they had not just survived, they had conquered. The carcass became both food and lesson. They tore at its flesh with teeth and stones, feasting until their bellies were full, stronger than ever before. They learned that its bones could be used as tools, its hide as shelter, its tendons as cord. What had once been a terror had now become a gift of survival. More importantly, the victory reshaped their minds. No longer did they see themselves as weak scavengers hiding from the world. They had proven that through unity, strategy, and courage, even the mightiest beast could fall. Around their cliff shelters, they replayed the battle in gestures and cries, teaching their young. Fear still lived in their hearts, but beside it now burned something new: hope. This battle marked the spark of humanity's destiny. Though still closer to monkeys than men, these beings had tasted the power of collective action, the beginning of tools, the roots of bravery. Their struggle with the giant ground sloth became legend whispered in shrieks under the stars, a tale passed long before true words existed. And in that story lay the foundation of everything to come: fire, weapons, tribes, civilizations. The forest would always remain dangerous, but the proto-humans had learned a truth that would echo across the ages: Survival was not merely about fleeing but about standing together against the impossible. And so, in the deep jungles of a world millions of years old, the first seeds of human courage were planted, born from the battle against a beast larger than their fears.